Good morning, everybody. Hello, and welcome to another Funky Bunch at Sunday Brunch Podcast. We're here live at 9 a.m. once again on a Sunday. For those of you watching later on Spotify or SoundCloud or even YouTube, hello, and enjoy whatever time it is for you or whatever day. For those of you who are watching later and did not catch this on Twitch or didn't know I do this on Twitch, I'm live daily at twitch.tv/DJ_funky_fresh. Of course, for those of you who watch this on Spotify, SoundCloud, or Twitch, don't know I have a YouTube. I've had a YouTube at youtube.com/DJ funkyfreshgaming. And of course, those of you watching on Twitch or YouTube and don't know about the Spotify or SoundCloud, just look for Funky Bunch at Sunday Brunch Podcast, or just look up my name, DJ Funky Fresh. Links are all in the YouTube, as well as in my Discord and on my Twitch. So, that should allow you guys to easily be able to find me, if needed. Now, today, we're going to be going over RPGs. Now, I put up a poll asking what y'all wanted, and the answer was personal opinions. So, and I already had planned on doing something like this anyway, but as I was doing some research, I realized I didn't have enough to fill up basically an hour in just my opinion on RPG video games. So, I decided to throw in the history overview of what RPGs are, and that should definitely help fill up our time. So, let's get started. A role-playing video game, RPG, which is also referred to as a CRPG, which is a computer role-playing game, is a video game genre where the player controls the actions of a character, or several party members, immersed in some well-defined world. Many role-playing video games have origins in a tabletop role-playing game, such as Dungeons & Dragons, and use much of the same terminology, settings, and game mechanics. Other major similarities with pen and paper game include developing storytelling and narrative elements, player character development, complexity, as well as replay value and immersion. One thing that pen and paper RPGs have over computer RPGs, and will always have over computer RPGs, is that they can be 100% adaptable to the situation. For instance, I have friends, and I've heard stories, and something I would do myself if I ever got into Dungeons & Dragons is try and thwart the Dungeon Master. Just try to do the most ludicrous and ridiculous thing possible within the realm of what my character can do, just to throw him off of his game. A good Dungeon Master can adapt to any situation. Unfortunately, a video game cannot do that. It is within a defined realm. Even if it feels like there are endless possibilities, you cannot break out and do something that is ingenious but outside of the realm of what it was already pre-programmed. And that is why, in my opinion, you could never do Dungeons & Dragons in a video game, because you just don't have that kind of adaptability and just spur of the moment change of plans. So the electronic medium removes the necessity of a game master and increases compact resolution speed. RPGs have evolved from simple text-based console window games into visually rich 3D experiences. So role-playing games obviously use the same terminology, setting, and game mechanics as early tabletop role-playing games such as Dungeons & Dragons. Players control a central game character or multiple, usually called a party, and attain victory by completing a series of quests or reaching the conclusion of a central storyline. Players explore a game world while solving puzzles and engaging in combat. A key feature of the genre is that characters grow in power and abilities, and characters are typically designed by the player. RPGs rarely challenge a player's physical coordination or reaction time, with the exception of ARPGs. Role-playing video games typically rely on a highly developed story and setting, which is divided into a number of quests. Players control one or several characters by issuing commands, which are performed by the character at an effectiveness determined by that character's numeric attributes. Often these attributes increase each time a character gains a level, and a character level goes up each time the player accumulates a certain amount of experience. Role-playing video games are also typically attempt to offer more complex and dynamic character interactions than what is found in other video game genres. This usually involves additional focus on the AI and scripted behavior of computer-controlled NPCs, or non-player characters. So the premise of many role-playing games tasks the player with saving the world, or whichever level of society is threatened. There are often twists and turns as the story progresses, such as the surprise appearance of estranged relatives, or enemies who become friends, or vice versa, friends becoming enemies. The game world is often a speculative fiction, fantasy, or sci-fi, which allows players to do things they cannot do in real life, and helps players suspend their disbelief about rapid character growth. To a lesser extent, settings closer to the present day or near future are possible. The story often provides much of the entertainment in the game. Because these games have strong storylines, they can often make effective use of recorded dialogue and voiceover narration. Players of these games tend to appreciate long cutscenes more than players of faster action games. For instance, just taking a look at the length and size of Final Fantasy compared to Dishonored. Dishonored, Deus Ex, those shortcuts, those cutscenes tend to be shorter than Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy, you can have upwards of 5, 10, even 15 minutes worth of cutscenes, whereas Deus Ex had like a minute cutscenes at a time. So, yeah. While most games advance the plot when the player defeats an enemy or completes a level, RPG games often progress the plot based on other important decisions. For example, a player may make the decision to join a guild, thus triggering a progression in that storyline that is now irreversible. New elements in the story may also be triggered by mere arrival in an area, rather than completing a specific challenge. The plot is usually divided so that each game location is an opportunity to reveal a new chapter in the story. I do agree, Emotive. Final Fantasy has some real long-ass cutscenes. Pen and paper role-playing games typically involve a player called a Game Master, or GM for short, who can dynamically create the story setting and rules and react to player choices. In role-playing video games, the computer performs the function of the Game Master. This offers the player a smaller set of possible actions, since computers can't engage in imaginative acting comparable to a skilled human Game Master. In exchange, the typical role-playing video game may have storyline branches, user interfaces, and stylized cutscenes and gameplay to offer a more direct storytelling mechanism. Characterization of non-player characters in video games is often handled using a dialogue tree. Saying the right things to the right NPCs will elicit useful information for the player, may even result in other rewards such as items or experience, as well as opening up possible storyline branches. Multiplayer online role-playing games can offer an exception to this contrast. Oh gosh. MMORPGs offer an exception to this contrast by allowing human interaction among multiple players, and in some cases enabling players to perform the role of Game Master. There's a quote from 1994 in Computer Gaming World that says, "Let's face it, about 90% of all CRPGs can be summed up as follows. We go out and bash on critters until we're strong enough to bash on Foozle. That's the plot, and usually most of the supporting storyline too." I disagree with that for now. Back in the day of 1994, I would agree with that, because if you think about it, that's games like Diablo and everything, where you're just grinding up levels so you can beat stronger monsters, grind up those levels so you can beat stronger monsters, grind up those levels to beat stronger monsters. It was a lot more of the text-based type of deal, and less about the story. So, hello Jay, thank you for the raid. Welcome to the podcast. Exploration and quests. So, exploring the world is an important aspect of many RPGs. Players will walk through, talking to non-playable characters, picking up objects, and avoiding traps. Some games, such as NetHack, Diablo, and the Fate series, randomize the structure of individual levels, increasing the game's variety and replay value. Oh, yes, and stronger monsters and more stronger monsters. To lead to stronger and stronger monsters. To lead to even more stronger monsters. To some bosses who turns out to be stronger than the monsters you fought before, until you fight some monsters after the boss. And then you've got monsters that are stronger than the boss. RPGs are fun. Let's see. Role-playing games where players complete quests by exploring randomly generated dungeons, and which include permadeath, are called roguelikes, which is named after the 1980 video game Rogue. Exactly, like Final Fantasy XIV. The game's story is often mapped onto exploration. For each chapter, the story is mapped onto a different location. RPGs usually allow players to return to previously visited locations. Yes, and then you die and you lose everything. In some cases. ARPGs, you tend not to lose everything. JRPGs, you're pretty likely to lose some things. Let's see. Usually there's nothing left to do in previous locations, although some locations change throughout the stories and offer the players new things to do in response. Players must acquire enough power to overcome a major challenge in order to progress to the next area, and this structure can be compared to boss characters at the ends of action games. Also, thank you for the follow there, Maid7385. The player typically must complete a linear sequence of certain quests in order to reach the endgame story, although quests in such games such as Arcanum and Geneforge can limit or enable certain choices later in the game. Many RPGs also often allow the player to seek out optional side quests and character interactions. Quests of this sort can be found by talking to these NPCs, and there may be no penalty for abandoning or ignoring these quests other than a missed opportunity or reward. Quests may involve defeating one or many monsters, rescuing NPCs, item fetch quests, or location puzzles such as mysteriously locked doors. So, I think with exploration, they've done a lot better at making it less linear. As in, if you leave a location because you've beaten it, usually they'll have you come back and revisit it nowadays for new quests, new side quests, or, the area has changed, or you're stronger, you have new abilities, so you can go back and do new things. I think being able to reuse the beginning is a great way of just taking full advantage of the entire is better because you're taking advantage of all the assets you put in the game as opposed to just A to B, B to C, C to D, E to F, never going back to A. I think that kind of just limits the possibilities of the game. Listening to this is better than playing 80% of games. That depends. In my opinion, listening to this is a lot better than listening to, or is better than playing sports games. Personally, I don't like sports games. So, let's see. Items and inventory in RPGs. Players can find loot, such as clothing, weapons, and armor throughout the game world and collect it. Players can trade items for currency and better equipment. Trade takes place while interacting with certain friendly NPCs, such as shopkeepers, and often use a specialized trading screen. Purchase items go into the player's inventory. Some games turn inventory management into a logistical challenge by limiting the size of the player's inventory, thus forcing the player to decide what they must carry at the time. This can be done by limiting the maximum weight that a player can carry, by employing a system of arranging items into a virtual space, or simply limiting the number that can be held. Yes, we should veto all sports games because they're not fun. You vote against it, or you vote it down. You say, no, you guys want it, but I don't. So the answer is no. So, yeah, I love how all the creative ways that RPGs, ARPGs, JRPGs have employed a way of stopping you from carrying items. So, 3 big ones. Dragon Quest, Monsters. Dragon Warrior Monsters is a good example currently for something I'm streaming. It limits the amount you have to 20. Just flat out. You just got a hard cap on how many items you can carry at one time. Then we've got a system of arranging items in a virtual space. Best example of that would be Diablo or Deus Ex, where you open up your item inventory and you see items take up a certain amount of squares, and then you have X amount of squares you have to arrange your stuff. So it's a game of Tetris. to try to be like, well, I have a shotgun, a sniper, and a pistol, but if I want to pick up this assault rifle, I'm going to have to either drop this sniper, or I'll have to get rid of this shotgun pistol combo, or get rid of these 30 healing items. I kind of like that system because it's a lot more realistic than a system of, well, I'm already carrying 20 items, can't pick up anything more, or even in this next one, which is limiting the maximum weight. That's also fairly realistic, but at the same time, not. So a good example of limiting the maximum weight a player can carry would be Skyrim, in which you could carry 3,000 pieces of cheese, or 3,000 cheese wheels, because a cheese wheel weighs 0.1, and 3,000 cheese wheels would weigh 300 pounds, which is exactly the limit you can carry in Skyrim, I believe. Now, is it realistic that you would carry 3,000 cheese wheels? Absolutely not. But according to the game, you can. So I think, in terms of realism, the system of arranging items in a virtual space makes sense, but a lot of the times when you're playing these JRPGs, ARPGs, you're trying to break the foundation of space and time. You're not trying to be realistic. You're trying to live in this fantastical world with these fantastical experiences, and you're going to be like me and be like, but I want all of the items to carry. Give me a magical bag that I can fit 20, 30, 40 of the same piece of armor because I could need it later. You never know. What if there's smelting? What if there's forging? What if there's item duplication creation? You know, I need to carry as many items as possible in order to potentially need it for later. What if when I go beat the bad guy, I need to use this super rare item to heal myself? And there's only 3 in the world. I could leave it on the ground and come get it later, but I could need it tomorrow. Well, you go enjoy your nap. Thanks for dropping by. Yes, I know I have a hoarding problem motive, and I will never use that super rare item, even if I know I have to use it. If I can avoid not doing it, I won't, because it's a super rare item. And that's just me with items and RPGs. Let's see, character actions and abilities. Most of the actions in an RPG are performed indirectly, with the player selecting an action and the character performing it by their own accord. Success at that action depends on the character's numeric attributes. RPGs often simulate dice rolling mechanisms from non-electronic role-playing games to determine success or failures. So D&D, you roll for initiative, you roll for skill checks. Computers, they'll roll that automatically in the background, which is, you know, both nice and not nice. It's nice because then you don't have to handle the whole idea of trying to figure out, alright, see, to pass this door, I need to be able to lockpick at 20, and even at level 20, I've got an 80% chance of successfully lockpicking it on the first try. So instead of picking up some dice and rolling it to see if you're gonna pass that 80% skill check, the computer just does it automatically, and it's just like, oh, you failed, you failed, you failed, hey, you got it, but you triggered a trap. Good example of that is Knights of the Old Republic. Old games. Really hope they remake it. I'll probably stream that or record it again at some point in the future. As a character's attributes improve, their chances of succeeding at a particular action will increase. Many RPGs allow players to play as an evil character as well. Although robbing and murdering indiscriminately may make it easier to get money, there are usually consequences in that other characters will become uncooperative or even hostile towards the player. Thus, these games allow players to make moral choices, but force players to live with the consequences of their actions. Games often let the player control an entire party of characters. However, if winning is contingent upon the survival of a single character, then that character effectively becomes the player's avatar. An example of this would be in Baldur's Gate, where if the character created by the player dies, the game ends and a previous save needs to be loaded. If I ever record or stream Knights of the Old Republic, I'll be the first person who successfully got you to watch it. I love Knights of the Old Republic. It's a good old series.
What
I have it.
are you doing in my swamp?
I have it on both the original Xbox and on PC. So thank you for the follow there, XXJK8. I hope you'll enjoy. Although some single-player role-playing games give the player an avatar that is largely predefined for the sake of telling a specific story, many RPGs make use of a character creation screen. This allows players to choose their character's sex, their race, species, and character class. Although many of those traits are cosmetic, there are functional aspects as well. Character classes will have different abilities and strengths. Common classes include fighters, spellcasters, thieves with stealth abilities, and clerics with healing abilities, or even mixed class such as a fighter who can cast simple spells. Good example of that would be Final Fantasy. You've got red mages who specialize in combat and some magic. You've got blue mages who specialize in enemy abilities. You've got monks who specialize in fighting only, no magic. You've got knights who can cast simple curative magic and fighting. You know, you got priests who suck at fighting, are good at healing. You know, there's so much out there in terms of just classes and everything. So it's one of those, you can easily play a game and it'll change, or it'll, you know, you can play the same game with different styles, different things. Bard, right, of course. You can't forget the Bard, Jade. Yes, the Bard, where you can sing to your allies and strengthen their resolve, cause them to move faster, hit harder, avoid better. You know, there's so many options available for Bards, for everything. Characters will also have a range of physical attributes such as dexterity and strength, which affects a player's performance in combat. Mental attributes such as intelligence may affect a player's ability to perform and learn spells, while social attributes such as charisma may limit the player's choices while conversing with non-playable characters. The attribute systems often resemble the D&D rule sets. That's something I've always wanted to be whenever I played... If I ever played D&D, I believe that my character would be the spoony bard. I would be the bard with a high charisma who would talk and sleep his way out of all the trouble. Why? Because that's my personality. And I would be successful. Some RPGs make use of magical powers, or equivalents, such as psychic powers or advanced technology. These abilities are confined to specific characters such as mages, spellcasters, or magic users, or even bards. In games where the player controls multiple characters, these magic users usually complement the physical strength of other classes. Magic can be used to attack, to defend, or to temporarily change an enemy's or allies' attributes. While some games allow players to gradually consume a spell as ammunition is consumed by a gun, most games offer players a finite amount of mana, which can be spent on any spell. Mana is restored by resting or by consuming potions. Characters can gain other non-magical skills, which can stay with the character as long as he lives. So some examples of spells that are consumed with ammunition. Final Fantasy III was a good example of that. Each, in between resting at an inn, you would have, you could cast, like, level 1 magic, like, 20 times. You could cast level 2 magic, 15 times, level 3 magic, 10 times, and less as it got to higher and higher tiers of magic. It wasn't based upon an MP system. It was purely based on, in between rests at an inn or a campsite, you had to, you know, you just had to watch how much magic you used. And Dijon in the Discord, I have bows on my head. One bow here, one bow here. So, as opposed to the idea of having MP, or a blue bar, or whatever you really call it, and using mana potions, a lot of the older games just gave you, hey, you can use this spell 20 times before you need to rest at an inn to use magic again. So, yeah. And then another big aspect about RPGs is experience and levels. So, although the characterization of the game's avatar will develop through the storytelling, characters may also become more functionally powerful by gaining new skills, weapons, and magic. This involves a positive feedback cycle that is central to most RPGs. The player grows in power, allowing them to overcome more difficult challenges and gain even more power. This is part of the appeal of the genre, where players can experience growing from an ordinary person into a superhero with amazing powers, whereas other games that give players powers immediately, in RPG games, players will choose the powers and skills that they gain as they grow experience. RPGs usually measure progress by counting experience points and character levels. Experience is usually earned by defeating enemies in combat, with some games offering experience for completing certain quests or conversations. Experience becomes a form of score, and accumulating a certain amount of experience will cause the character's level to level up. This is referred to as leveling up, and it gives the player an opportunity to raise one or more of his character's attributes. Many RPGs allow players to choose how to improve their character by allocating a finite number of points into the attributes of their choice. Gaining experience will also unlock new magic spells for characters in their magic. A good example of what we're currently playing that uses that would be Dragon Age Origins. Anytime I level up, you see I get 3 experience points that I can throw into, one of the multiple categories of, strength, dexterity, cunning, constitution, willpower, magic. I get 3 of those a level, so, strength obviously levels up my flat attack. Dexterity levels up, the ability to dodge attacks, yada yada yada. But also it allows me to choose what I do. I get to choose new fighting abilities. I get to choose some passive abilities and things like that. All that changes just based upon how I'm leveling myself up. Let's see. Several RPGs also give player-specific skill points, which can be used to unlock a new skill or improve an existing one. And that's exactly what I was trying to say. You get choices to upgrade your skills or unlock new skills when you level up. This may sometimes be implemented as a skill tree, as with the technology tree set in strategy video games. Learning a particular skill in the tree will unlock more powerful skills deeper in the tree. Oh, excuse me. 3 different systems of rewarding the player's characters for solving the tasks in the game can be set apart. The experience system, also known as the level-based system, the training system, also known as the skill-based system, and the skill point system, also known as level-free system. So the experience system, by far the most common system, was inherited from pen and paper RPGs and emphasized receiving experience points, or abbreviated as XP or EXP, by winning battles, performing class-specific activities, and completing quests. Often a certain amount of experience is gained, the character advances a level, and some games level up occurs automatically when the required amount of experience is reached. And others, the players can choose when and where to advance a level. Likewise, abilities and attributes may increase automatically or manually. Good example of auto level ups versus choosing level ups would be Dragon Age Origin. I can choose when I level up. Versus Pokemon. You automatically level up. The training system is similar to the way the basic RPG system works. The first video game to use this was Dungeon Master, which emphasized developing the character's skills by using them, meaning that if a character wields a sword for some time, he or she will become proficient in it. A good example of that, actually, is Final Fantasy II, where using a sword X amount of times, you leveled up your ability to use the sword. If you used the shield X amount of times, you gain the ability to use shields, bows, all that sort of thing. That's the type of, training system that they're referring to. You use it or lose it. Well, you don't really use it. You just don't gain anything. And then finally, in the skill point system, as used in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, for example, the character is rewarded with skill points for completing quests, which they can then directly use to buy skills and or attributes without having to wait until the next level up. So, for instance, you'll level up, but you don't gain anything until you allocate those skill points. So, let's see. Yeah, let's do these last 2 parts and then we'll jump into something else. So, combat. Older games often separated combat into its own mode of gameplay, distinct from exploring the game world. More recent games tend to maintain a consistent perspective for exploration and combat. Some games, especially earlier video games, generate battles from random encounters. More modern RPGs are more likely to have persistent wandering monsters that move about the game world independently of the player. Good example would be legitimately Dragon Quest. So we just beat Dragon Quest 7 last week. And obviously, if I wanted to fight something, I would walk into the monster that is wandering around the world. And now, Dragon Warrior Monsters, it's completely randomly generated. I'm just walking around and I'll suddenly get into a battle. You have a good morning too, Jade. Thanks for dropping by. So, I think as technology has grown, they've been able to do more with that. It's much easier to have... you can divert more resources to displaying monsters on the world screen as opposed to just making them randomly generated, because we've got that capability. We've got the more powerful machines. We've got the better software. We're not limited by memory anymore. So because of all of that, it's a lot easier. So... most RPGs also use stationary boss monsters in key positions and automatically trigger battles with them when the player character enters these locations or performs certain actions. Combat options typically involve positioning characters, selecting which enemy to attack, and exercising special skills such as casting spells. In a classical turn-based system, only one character may act at a time. All other characters remain still, with a few exceptions that may involve the use of special abilities. The order in which the characters act is usually dependent on their attributes, such as speed or agility. Their system rewards strategic planning more than quickness. It also points to the fact that realism in games is a means to an end of immersion in the game world, not an end in itself. A turn-based system makes it possible, for example, to run within range of an opponent and kill him before he gets a chance to act, or duck out from behind hard cover, fire, and retreat back without an opponent being able to fire back, which are, of course, both impossibilities. However, tactical possibilities have been created by this unreality that did not exist before. The player determines whether the loss of immersion in a reality of a game is worth the satisfaction gained from the development of the tactic and its successful execution. Fallout has been praised as being the shining example of a good turn-based combat system. Never played Fallout, so I cannot be certain about that. Real-time combat can import features from action games, creating a hybrid action RPG game genre. Those are the ARPGs. But other RPG battle systems, such as the Final Fantasy battle systems, have imported real-time choices without emphasizing coordination or reflexes. Other systems combine real-time combat with the ability to pause the game and issue orders to all characters under his or her control. When the game is unpaused, all characters follow the orders they were given. This real-time with pause system, or RTWP, has been particularly popular in games designed by BioWare. The most famous RTWP engine is the Infinity Engine. Other names for real-time with pause include active pause and semi-real-time. Tactical RPG maker Aperion named their system Smart Pause Mode because it would automatically pause based on a number of user-configurable settings. Fallout Tactics, Brotherhood of Steel, and Arcanum of Steamworks and Magic Obscura offered players the option to play in either turn-based or RTWP mode via a configuration setting. The latter also offered a fast turn-based mode, though all three of the game modes were characterized by being poorly balanced and being overly simplified. I tried to play Fallout 3, but it would randomly crash on me. Like, the only Fallout I'd be able to play is probably Fallout 4, to be honest. So, yeah. Come on. Early Ultimate games featured timed turns. They were strictly turn-based, but if the player waited more than a second or so to issue the command, the game would automatically issue a pass command, allowing the monster to take a turn while the PCs did nothing. This is a further subdivision by the structure of the battle system. In many early games such as Wizardry, monsters in the party are arranged into ranks and can only attack enemies in the front rank with melee weapons. Other games, such as most of the Ultima series, employ duplicates of the miniature combat system deployed traditionally used in role-playing games. Representations of the player characters and monsters would move around in an arena modeled after the surrounding terrain, attacking any enemies that are sufficiently near. So a good example of the different types of combat. So with ARPG, obviously, time is continuously moving around. You know, Dishonored, for example. you moving around. It's not turn-based. I can attack 3 times in a row before an enemy gets a chance to hit once, or an enemy could ambush me and hit me twice because I got stunned. There's lots of different things like that would cause stuff like that. But then there's Dragon Quest Origins, where it's turn-based. I hit, they hit, I hit, they hit. However, I can pause the game and manually issue orders to each of my party members and then unpause time and watch them execute those. Then there's Final Fantasy, early Final Fantasy, where you had the option of like an RTWP, a real time with pause, where you've got that ATB system where the bar has to fill. Once it's filled, you can do your turn. But the way that they would do the with pause thing is by once you open up your menu to select your actions, all the ATB bars would pause. That way you could think it over, kind of sort through your inventory, sort through your abilities, figure out what you want to do, yada yada yada. And finally, there is interface and graphics. Players typically navigate the game world from a first or third-person perspective in 3D RPGs. However, an isometric or aerial top-down perspective is common in party-based RPGs, in order to give the player a clear view of their entire party and the surroundings. RPGs require the player to manage a large amount of information and frequently make use of a windowed interface. For example, spellcasting characters will often have a menu of spells they can use. On the PC, players typically use a mouse to click on icons and menu options. Oh gosh. While console games have the player navigate through menus using a game controller. Older games often revealed calculations of the game as seen in Dungeons & Dragons games, although more recent games have removed this information to improve immersion. I think Dragon Age Origins actually shows some of the roles. Knights of the Old Republic 100% shows the old roles. Like, your will, your saves. It tells you, like, this gives you plus 20 to save. Type of deal. But that's kind of the basics of the RPGs. We could go more into, like, the history, the cultural distance. Let's see. So, we're going to jump into really what we want to jump into a topic, which is JRPGs versus Western RPGs or ARPGs. So, a Japanese role-playing game is a game that have distinct features different from Western RPGs. JRPGs are typically made by Japanese developers, but not exclusively. The term JRPG stems from console RPGs, which defines games like Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy. However, nowadays, since the term JRPG covers a wide array of different RPGs, it cannot be really seen as a genre, but more of an umbrella term. One can say a game is a JRPG if it fits the criteria one would think belongs to a JRPG. So some aesthetics. When RPGs began to gain popularity, hardware limitations restricted games to have 8-bit graphics. However, as PCs and console hardwares became more advanced, the graphics in RPG changes as well. One element that is noticeable when looking at Western RPGs and JRPGs is the art style and graphics. JRPGs usually opt for a Japanese anime look, while Western RPGs lean towards a more realistic look. Such a style is noticeable in games like Pokemon, Persona, or Dragon Quest. Final Fantasy's graphics have changed over time and begun to approach a more realistic look, but the crazy hairstyles remain. Game mechanics. Since JRPGs contain an array of sub-RPG genres, it can include many game mechanics. The majority include a basic stat system. As mentioned earlier, characters level up by experience and can also improve their HP and MP. Depending on the genre, combat system differs. In action RPGs, battles occur in real time, but in turn-based RPGs, a player must use a menu to decide his or her attacks. Okay, so I spoke wrong slightly. So JRPGs is 100% different than Western RPGs, but ARPGs fall under both umbrellas. However, you typically see ARPGs in the Western. So, I'll just clarify that real quick. So, where were we? What did you say? It would be weird if FF characters had normal hair at this point. I 100% agree. So, let's see. In action RPGs, battles occur in real time, but turn-based RPGs, a player must use a menu to decide his or her attacks. All games that fall under the RPG genre require the player to strategize by exposing enemy weaknesses. Depending on the JRPG, there can be random encounters which occur when the avatar is traversing along the main overworld. Random encounters depend on the game, but random encounters can be avoided, like in Pokemon, or completely turned off, like in Bravely Default. Since random encounters and stats are main elements of JRPGs, JRPGs can have an emphasis on grinding. Narrative. Generally, JRPGs are more story-driven. For this reason, a lot of JRPGs tend to have a deep linear or non-linear storyline, but not much feel for an open world like Western RPGs such as Fallout 3 or Skyrim. Moreover, like any RPG, they can be text-heavy, with lots of character dialogue making the game pace feel slow. This is notable in games like Persona 4 or Bravely Default. The characters in JRPGs are usually pre-made characters, and customization is not as vast in Western RPGs. This lack of customization is noticeable in games like Kingdom Hearts or FF7, where the main protagonist is an immutable Sora or Cloud. Examples of games known as JRPGs. Final Fantasy VII. The Final Fantasy series is a series that is known to most gamers. One of the best acclaimed games for the series is said to be FF7. Final Fantasy was developed by Squaresoft, formerly known as Square, now known as Square Enix, for the PlayStation home console. Out of all Final Fantasy games, FF7 is the best-selling game with approximately 10 million copies sold, and it is no surprise given that many consider it a masterpiece for many reasons. FF7 was the first game in the series to be rendered in 3D. One of the main components of FF7 were the characters. Like most JRPGs, FF7 had characters with unique personalities, and as the player progressed, so did the investment in the character. There are many memorable scenes in FF7 that left players in awe. The story, although a bit convoluted, and the characters the player cared for were things that helped define the game under the term JRPG. Persona 4 is another example of a JRPG. The Persona series is actually a spin-off of another influential JRPG series called Megami Tensei. While it is a JRPG, it also has simulation elements. In Persona 4, the player takes the role of a high school student who must progress through the Midnight Channel dungeons before a deadline set by the game. There are days in Persona 4 where you must attend school, and after school you have the option to do various activities, such as social link activities, shopping, or battling. What the player can do each day depends on the day itself. The dungeons the player gets to explore are like those found in dungeon crawlers, randomly generated dungeons. Pokemon is another good JRPG example. Pokemon has grown to be the second biggest video game franchise in the world. It is funny to think about Pokemon as a JRPG, but it is one since it is an RPG developed by a Japanese developer and has certain elements found in other games categorized as a JRPG. One thing Pokemon lacks in respect to being a JRPG is a compelling story. Very true. While it is a linear game, the story of Pokemon in no way compares to Final Fantasy III or Final Fantasy VII. In Pokemon, the player has an option to choose his own team as opposed to having teams assigned to him like in most RPGs such as Kingdom Hearts, where your party consists of Donald and Goofy a majority of the time. Each Pokemon the player catches has its own type, which is similar to classes or jobs in JRPGs. Catching Pokemon is similar to Dragon Quest, in which you are able to capture monsters to use in your own team. The battle system in Pokemon is turn-based and intuitive since rather than having classes, you have types. It is intuitive because it makes sense why certain types are weak against others, while in other RPGs, weaknesses are less straightforward to recognize. As noted, Pokemon has many elements found in other JRPGs. Pokemon has elements of dungeon crawling and boss battles that require skill. A player can grind in Pokemon, and in some cases must grind in order to advance in the game. And finally, a fourth example of a JRPG is Earthbound, or Mother 2. Earthbound originally called Mother 2 in Japan, is a cult JRPG that is praised as one of the best RPGs of the SNES. If I could ever get my hands on Earthbound, an Earthbound cartridge, I would stream the crap out of that game. I want to know the full story of Earthbound. Oh, Earthbound. Earthbound took elements from the Dragon Quest series, such as the perspective in battles. It also removed random encounters, and instead encounters occur when Ness, the protagonist of Earthbound, collides with an enemy sprite on screen. The game differs itself from other JRPGs in its stories. While JRPGs tend to make series strong that strive to be epic, Earthbound makes fun of it. The enemies in the game are ridiculous, ranging from dogs to hippies and starmen. The only reason why I don't do it is because Earthbound is super expensive. But those are some good examples of JRPGs as well as what a JRPG is. So let's look at Western RPGs. Western RPGs are role-playing games developed in the Western world, including the Americas and Europe. They originated on mainframe university computers in the 1970s, were later popularized by titles such as Ultima and Wizardry in the early to mid-1980s, and continued to be produced for modern home computer and video game console systems. The genre's golden age occurred in the mid to late 1980s, and its popularity suffered a downturn in the mid-90s, as developers struggled to keep up with hardware changes and increasing development costs. A later series of isometric role-playing games, published by Interplay Productions and Blizzard Entertainment, was developed over a longer time period and set new standards of production quality. So CRPGs are once again popular. Recent titles such as BioWare's Mass Effect series and Bethesda's Softworks' The Elder Scrolls series have been produced for console systems and have received multi-platform releases. Although independently developed games are frequently created as PC exclusives. Developers of RPGs have continuously experimented with various graphical perspectives and styles of play, such as real-time and turn-based timekeeping systems, axonometric and first-person graphical projections, and single-character or multi-character parties. Subgenres include ARPGs, roguelike, and tactical role-playing games. So, for the most part, a Western RPG truly is just an RPG created not in Japan. While that's not 100% exclusive, like, you can have a Western RPG created in, a Western RPG can be created in Japan, and a JRPG can be created in the West. For the most part, that is a huge difference. But like I said, a lot of it just... It's really hard to describe, truly. Actually, let me read this real quick. It is a Reddit post that I think really described what is the genre difference between JRPGs and WRPGs. So, WRPG and JRPG are two completely different genres. They have nothing to do with where the game was developed, just like Italian food doesn't have to come from Italy to be Italian. JRPGs are usually very story-focused, almost always with a preset protagonist, with a preset history and personality, usually with a given or default name. They usually focus much more on numbers and dice rolls than player input, and are frequently turn-based or have some kind of turn-based function. WRPGs are much more player-focused, usually with an avatar-type protagonist who the player gets to name and design and even decide their own personality. The protagonist in a WRPG is not a unique character, but rather an avatar for the player to insert themselves into the world. WRPG gameplay tends to be less number-focused and more skill-based, and the gameplay centers around exploring the world and doing whatever you want, rather than following an extremely linear story progression. Gameplay is often more actiony and not usually turn-based. There are different genres because they are very distinct gameplay styles. They are as different as a first-person shooter and a third-person shooter. Both are shooters, but they have very distinct elements to their gameplay that affect the experience. Same is true for JRPG versus WRPG. They're only named as such for the same reason Italian food is called Italian food. The JRPG style was popularized in Japan with series such as FF, Dragon Quest, and Megami Tensei, or Persona. The WRPG is popularized in the West with things like Elder Scrolls, Fallout, The Witcher, and BioWare games. It is possible for a JRPG to be developed in the West and still be a JRPG. It is also possible for a WRPG to be made by a Japanese studio and still be a WRPG. Example of a Japanese developer creating a WRPG would be Dark Souls and Dragon's Dogma. Examples of JRPGs created by Western developers would be South Park: The Stick of Truth and Child of Light. Both Dark Souls and Dragon's Dogma have open-world gameplay with a heavy bias towards action over numbers. They both have playable characters functioning as an avatar, and they both focus on the player exploring the world as their core gameplay element, with the plotline itself taking a backseat. Child of Light and South Park, however, both have turn-based gameplay. They both have plot lines at the forefront of gameplay, and both have protagonists who are their own individual character and not an avatar of the player. And again, JRPG does not mean any RPG made in Japan. That would be an absolutely worthless genre description because not every game or every RPG made in Japan is similar. Likewise, not every RPG made by the Western studios is a WRPG by default. Genre exists for us to make distinctions between types of games easily. They exist so we can tell someone what sort of gameplay a game might be briefly without explaining it. If a game has you running and jumping on platforms with some light puzzle-solving elements, it's easier just to say it's a puzzle platformer. If a game features a first-person perspective in which combat consists of shooting enemies at a range with a variety of weapons, it's easier to call it an FPS. Genres only make sense if they actually make a unique, recognizable aspect to them. Genres have to be based on gameplay, on the gameplay itself. Making a game based on location it was made in is ridiculous because it defeats the purpose of even having a genre. Saying a game is Japanese will tell someone very little about how it actually plays. Mario is Japanese, Zelda is Japanese, Pokemon is Japanese, and yet all of these are very, very, very different games. Similarly, Call of Duty, Bioshock, The Witcher, and Skyrim are very different games, and so saying the game is Western is meaningless as well. Jumping back to the food metaphor, we don't call Italian food Italian because it was made in Italy. You can make Italian food in America and yet have it still be Italian food. It's called Italian food because it has a specific style and flavor that was popularized in Italy. If you told your friends you were taking them out for American food and then took them to an Italian restaurant, they'd be confused. Even if your logic is, but this is all in America, it's American food. Italian and American food are styles, not descriptions of origin. They have nothing in common. So you can't really call Italian food American, even if it's made in America, because Olive Garden and McDonald's have very little in common. That's why you can't call a game like Dark Souls a JRPG. Dark Souls and Final Fantasy have absolutely nothing in common, so why would you group them under the same genre? It would be just as ridiculous to group Zelda and Mario under the same genre just because they're Nintendo games. And yes, there are many games that blend elements of both genres together. If Final Fantasy XII and Xenoblade have many elements common to WRPGs, especially their combat, but I still consider them JRPGs because they have a story focus and not player interaction focus. So, to summarize, a JRPG usually has less focus on gameplay and more on story, plot, characters, etc. A WRPG usually has a more focus on player interaction with the world and less on the actual story. That's the core difference, where the game itself is made irrelevant. Dark Souls and Dragon's Dogma aren't JRPGs because they're Japanese games. They're just Japanese WRPGs. And similarly with South Park and Child of Light, they're Western JRPGs. Also, if you're wondering why this is important, try telling someone who likes JRPGs and not WRPGs to play Dragon's Dogma. I bet they won't like it. The genres are very different. It's important that you not confuse people by telling them a game or is a genre that it isn't. Telling someone a game is a JRPG implies that the gameplay is similar to Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest. So if it feels like Skyrim, they'll be disappointed. Similarly, telling someone a game is a WRPG implies that the gameplay is more like Skyrim or Dragon Age. So if they find a turn-based combat and linear story, they'll likewise be disappointed. Dragon Age is a bad example of that because it is turn-based and a fairly linear style. Anyway, whatever. So if you want a non-RPG example, telling someone Dark Souls, blah, blah, is technically made in Japan is like telling someone Portal is technically an FPS because it's in first person and you shoot things. According to the words alone, you may be technically right, but you're missing the point. You might be technically correct, but you are missing the barn. You took a shot in the dark and you missed the target standing directly in front of you with the gun aimed directly at the thing. You just completely shot backwards. So that is the best example, I think, for the difference between the JRPG, WRPG, and everything. I didn't really get to jump into the main topic I wanted to do, so I'm going to kind of just jump into it really quickly right here. I mostly wanted to talk about kind of JRPGs and ARPGs and how I kind of dislike the fact that JRPGs are kind of shifting a little bit towards ARPGs in terms of Final Fantasy is the biggest reason I'm focusing on this, because Dragon Quest has kind of maintained the exact same system for decades and is sticking with them. However, Final Fantasy, if you look at 13.3 and 7 Remake, and even 15, which we haven't gotten to, they're less focused on turn-based combat. Like, yeah, there is still technically an turn-based because there's a slight ATB you have to deal with. You know, you gotta wait for your bar to recharge before you can attack. But it's more focused on, well, I can get 3 attacks if I do this, or I can do 1 attack if I do this, but they're attacking me at the same time, so I have to deal with avoiding their stagger, or defending, or something like that. I don't... Let's see. The definition of an ARPG, real-time combat, where they have direct control over the character as opposed to turn or menu-based combat, while still having the focus on the character's stats in order to determine relative strength and abilities. There we go. So yes, it's technically becoming a JRPG. Because in Final Fantasy, you're more focused on just the action of what's going on, as opposed to, you know, strategery. Like, you don't have that whole, you know, okay, I go, you go, based upon an ATB system. It's, you know, you're moving around. You're trying to avoid attacks. You can avoid attacks just by getting out of the way so they can't hit you. But it's less about, let me choose my attack. Let me choose my party's attack. It's more of, I hit you as many times as I can before you hit me, or I can avoid you and then hit you again, type of deal. And that's something I'm kind of sad that Final Fantasy is shifting towards. Like, 7 Remake, don't get me wrong, it's a lot of fun, and I enjoy it, and it is refreshing that they're changing the style, but then again, they change the style every major game, so who knows what 16 will be. But, it's just one of those, I still enjoy the whole, alright, let me see, my ATB bar is at 75%, the enemy just attacked, so I know they're not going to be able to attack. Let's see, my healer is ready and up. I can now heal my party. Then I can get my fighter to go hit. I'll get my mage to start casting a spell. And then I'll have my monk focus in on their strength, so the next attack is double. That's the kind of thing I've always enjoyed more so. And that's kind of why Dragon Quest still, to me, holds a much stronger pull to keep playing it more and more versus Final Fantasy, because Final Fantasy, each game is its own separate unique thing. I mean, Dragon Quest, like, all the plot lines are different in Dragon Quest, so it's also, each game is its own unique thing, and, you know, it builds off of each other to be better and better and better, but the style is very expected. You go in knowing what you're going to play. Final Fantasy, jumping from 10 to 10-2 to, you know, 12, 13, 13-2, 13-3, 15, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All of them are different. Significantly different. You know? And it is nice, you know? It's not like, oh, I have to play the same game again. It's just one of those things that, you know, it's different. It's changing, and, I mean, there's so much out there for them to do that I don't want to be like, they should never stray away from the typical turn-based system. They should. It's just, it's not my favorite style of JRPG, which is why I've always stuck more with the way I've done things. But, you know, what can you do? You just keep playing. That's really all you can do. But, yeah, that was kind of, down and dirty RPG, JRPG, CRPG, WRPG history. And kind of my opinions on the thing. So, I dropped a knowledge bomb on all of you. So I hope y'all enjoyed this knowledge bomb. Y'all got smashed with. So, yeah. I'd like to thank you all for coming by and hanging out with me, listening. For those of you who are new here, this podcast goes live on YouTube. It'll probably be up in about an hour to an hour and a half from now. It will also be up on Spotify. If you look at, look for Funky Bunch at Sunday Brunch. This is podcast number 23, I believe. 23 or 24. I could actually really quickly check it out. I mean, we've been podcasting for quite a while. Let's see. Podcasts. This is podcast 22. I was off by a little bit. Yes, this is podcast number 22, as well as, obviously, like I said, YouTube. We've almost been podcasting for 6 months. It's been about 5 months now. Once a week, 5 months. But, yes, gaming videos go up on YouTube, and I stream daily. So, always drop by to see what's happening. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. And until the next time, everybody. Stay funky, people.